Welcome to all of you joining us today. We wanted to put something together rather quickly to address some of the growing concerns in the entrepreneurial community surrounding coronavirus. And thanks to Michael and the crew here at TruePoint Wealth Counsel for hosting us. They had all the tech ready to go, and it's been short notice. And also thanks to Lynn Anstead and Tim Reddig at EO Central for their support in pulling this together so quickly. And for me, it was an amazing time to be part of this community because it was just awesome to see everyone submit questions for this live stream. And as we go along, please continue to feel free to submit your questions via the chat. We have Scott, who is going to be reviewing those and asking them as they come in on your behalf. One note, we've had a lot of requests to post a recording of this town hall. We're going to do that, but it will be a publicly viewable video. So we wanted to make it public to help the non-EO entrepreneurial community. But for confidentiality reasons, we're going to not be announcing your names, locations, or businesses as you ask your questions. But we do have a chat set up, so you also will not be able to see each other's questions, but rest assured, Scott's monitoring those, and we'll get to them as time permits. For those of you watching the recording who have no idea what the Entrepreneur Organization is, I encourage you all to click the link below and check it out. It's an amazing global community of like-minded entrepreneurs. We all come together to learn and grow, both in business and in our personal lives. And before I intro the panelists, I legitimately thank you guys so much for, on such short notice, giving up your time to be here. So I know you're busy, and we all really appreciate this. So first of all, our host today at TruePoint Wealth Counsel, we have Michael Chasnoff. He's a former EOer and a current strategic partner of EO Cincinnati. We have Allison Schroeder of Palm Communications, also a strategic partner. We're a little out of order here. We have Andy from Wood Lamping. He is an employment law attorney, also a strategic partner. Mike Wilson here is Chief Technical Officer of Interlink Cloud Advisors. They're EO members. And then Dr. Martha Orbella from the Christ Hospital, board certified in internal medicine and a fellow American College of Physicians. And me, I'm Chris Mann, the EO Cincinnati Marketing and Communication Chair this year. And the guy who tried to pull this off last minute, so we'll see if it works. We'll see if it works or not. Yeah. So before we start, I'm going to flip it over to Michael. He's going to kind of just give a brief sort of financial overview of some of the things that your clients have been asking, and I'll cede the floor to you.
Okay. Well, thank you, Chris. I appreciate that. I guess the best way to get started would be to understand that we all need to have a well thought out financial and investment plan. It's very difficult in times like today to start reacting without a plan in place. So I would hope to assume that most of us listening in on this broadcast that we do have a plan, and when you have essentially an understanding that what your plan is, then you can actually begin to react in a way that is in concert with that plan. For example, many of the clients at TruePoint have a 70-30 allocation, 70% to stocks, 30% to bonds. Now we have an opportunity to look at how those assets are allocated throughout retirement plans. If you have a 401k, possibly even a defined benefit plan, as well as your taxable investment accounts. The reason why I talk about retirement plans and taxable accounts, there's two different opportunities with each type of investment, but it's clear that the opportunity to take advantage of market volatility is part of a well thought out plan. Now, I want to step back one more step and say, are you in fact an investor, or are you a speculator? Because there's the entrepreneurial spirit in us. Kind of pulls out this speculator mindset that we want to do something really big and bold. In this kind of environment, that usually results in big, bold tax losses. So, I would really recommend that every 5 percent decline in the market is where you want to add incrementally to your investment portfolio. But we do know a few things about the financial markets. If we go back in history, and you can go to any number of internet sources for long-term returns of the stock market, we know that the stock market generally returns 10% per year. And but in order to get those returns, you have to be an investor. And an investor understands that they are in the market for 5 or more years. They are not trading in and out of the portfolio. They are investing for a long term, and that means every 5 years we've got to expect as an investor an environment like we're in today, where the market could go down as much as 30 or 33% on average. So these are basic requirements to understand in order to answer some of the other questions that I understand we've actually had a chance to look at, and more of the questions that will be coming. But I want to wrap up by saying we'll talk and answer some of the questions specifically about what's going on today, and some of the techniques that we want to take advantage of through the Q&A. But I wanted to start off with that basic understanding. Thank you.
Yeah, great. So you mentioned every 5 years or so you have to sort of be prepared for a dip. How is this different from the last dip in 2008, 2009? So
2008 was a financial crisis. This might feel like a financial crisis, but this is a natural disaster. So we need to understand that in the financial crisis of 2008, essentially consumers were exposed to leverage through all kinds of mortgage debt, and the banks were overly exposed and over leveraged as well through derivatives and other types of strategies to extend further leverage to the consumers. That was a very difficult time, and we were on a financial brink because of the weakness in the economy. Today's downturn, as a natural disaster, will eventually run its course, but it is one that starts on a much stronger financial footing, and that's something that really should look at it as a very much a positive going forward.
All right, great, thank you. I do want to get back to you about sort of some timing things in a minute, but I'm sure everyone watching, the first thing you want to do is ask a doctor. And I'm like, I got to find a doctor who I know to see if the stuff I'm hearing is actually real or not. So I want to turn to Martha, and generally I think we're all pretty well versed on, who's at risk, how it spreads, washing your hands, use the hand sanitizer, sing happy birthday twice, and that's like about 20 seconds from so I've been singing a lot of happy birthday. But should we, what's fact, what's fiction? Should we believe the hype? What, how nervous should we be as we go about our daily lives? Can I stop going to the gym, please?
So really good question. And this is so rapidly changing. The best source for questions such as that is the CDC.gov has a website. Yesterday, they said they're now going to only update that at noon and at 4 p.m. because it is such a rapidly changing. The numbers are trying to, get as much information out to the people that need it as they can. I would say 2 things that really happened yesterday. One was the World Health Organization declared this a pandemic, which is a pretty scary word. What that means is that this virus has spread across the world. So that has huge health implications, not a reason to be afraid, but also just a reason to take this seriously.
Does that change anything, the pandemic, from a response perspective?
They had actually been cautious about doing that because they felt that they wanted to have people still be trying to prevent it. So that this is not a throw in the towel, this is a take this seriously.
Got it.
I think one of the scary things that happened just last night was Tom Hanks coming out and saying that he and his wife are infected. And I kind of thought of this as kind of being back with the AIDS epidemic. It was not a pandemic, but an epidemic when Magic Johnson came out and said he was HIV infected. And it became very real to all of us that these people that we think have or somehow protected can actually
They're not
become
superhuman.
a victim of this, or not a victim, infected by it.
So from a travel perspective, I know as entrepreneurs, we all travel quite a bit. And I know a lot of large events, including our own EO event in Cape Town, was recently canceled. So should we be nervous when we travel? Should we just take normal precautions? What about, the pillowcases and the blankets? And do I need to wear a hazmat suit? Give us your best recommendations on that. Should I cancel my trip to go skiing?
So what I'm recommending to my patients and family members and friends is control as many things as you can. And I think that there's a lot of fear in terms of the city of Cincinnati, the state of Ohio have declared emergencies. That is, and maybe our lawyer can help us, but that's actually so that they can take action more quickly. So that's not
freeze
really
up funds,
scary.
right?
Correct. They can go around some certain rules and things like that to get help to people more quickly. I'm recommending and is just control as many things as you can. If it's for a ski trip, not life or death, hopefully there'll be other ski seasons.
Yeah,
that
for
you
sure.
can do that. Take as many precautions as you can. The real concern has been we are not able currently in the United States to have ready access to testing. So there's lots of people that are out there that may be infected, may be spreading things that we can't properly counsel and put in quarantine or isolate. So, I know my organization has recommended that any person not be in a group of more than 30 people. And that's kind of a good rule to kind of
limit exposure.
Limit your unnecessary exposure.
Is it similar to the flu as far as the way it spreads? I mean, is it more easily spread than the flu? Is it the same? If I touch an infected, how long does an infected surface stay infected?
So that's a really good question. And I think there's a lot of information. Most of it's coming out of China where they've been dealing with it for months now. It is a virus. It is predominantly spread by airborne. It can live on surfaces. So that's where the whole wiping things down. Hand washing is quite effective. Covering sneeze, not touching your face. I know in our office, we're not allowed to eat anything at our desk, which is a really good, simple thing to do. But if you think about how many times you're touching your computer, touching your dirty phone, then putting something in your mouth or touching a pen. So that's a really simple way to kind of hopefully keep the hands a little cleaner.
But other than that, it's sort of standard practices.
So the recommendation, the flu has been around for hundreds of years. Everybody in this room has been exposed to the flu and has some immunity. No one has ever been exposed to coronavirus, this certain strain of coronavirus. There's no medicine to effectively treat it. There's 2 medicines that are thought to have compassionate use. They're thought to be helpful, but it's not that you can just go out and, a Z-Pack is not going to be effective against this. An antibiotic is not going to be effective. Steroids are actually thought to increase the transmission. So there's some very simple things that people are used to doing. I've got a cold, can you send me this medicine?
Forget it.
The game has changed.
Okay.
So
Great. You mentioned legal. I do want to switch over to Andy real quick. I'd say from the pre-submitted questions, a lot of them had to do with employment law and some downsizing questions, furloughs versus layoffs, how those differ. Talk to us a little bit about that and maybe best practices if in fact some people in the entrepreneurial community do need to downsize.
Sure. Well, and to your point, Chris, the fact that the World Health Organization did classify this as a pandemic, it does help employers in terms of their options in reducing their workforce, administrating leave policies. It gives you some more flexibility because the government recognizes that this is serious and the focus should be on stopping the spread. In terms of reduction in force, again, you have a lot more leeway here. Typically, in a normal business setting, when there's a reduction in force, you really need to justify the reason for that reduction in force. You need to have some legitimate business reasons as to why you selected the people who are going to be reduced. And oftentimes you put together severance packages. And the real reason for the severance package is to limit lawsuits and claims of unfair treatment or discrimination. You don't really have that risk here. Everybody recognizes that these things may need to occur. But I would caution you, if you are going through a RIF or a reduction in force, you need to carefully look at who you need, who you don't need, and have very good business reasons for why you pick certain people over others. Because even in this trying time, you can have claims of age discrimination, gender discrimination, race discrimination, if you reduce your workforce in a way that disproportionately impacts a given group.
Okay. One question we had that I found fascinating, I hadn't even thought of it. Is it true that if you tell some employees that they can work from home, but others that they need to come to work, is there an opportunity that they can sue for unfair treatment and being exposed to more danger?
There absolutely is. And, you know, in the world of employment law and HR, you know, consistency is key. So if you are applying your telecommuting policies in a way that appears to be discriminatory, you can be opening yourself up to a lawsuit or a claim. I just advise, and it's the same thing I would advise on a risk. If you have a reason why one person can work at home and the other person cannot, then you need to articulate that reason. You know, if Jim needs to be in the office because Jim needs to interact with clients at a certain event, but Jane can be home because she doesn't have any projects like that, that's a perfectly legitimate reason for distinguishing between the two.
Right.
But you really need to analyze that more closely, especially because I can imagine, and Mike will speak to this, I can imagine you're going to have large portions of the workforce working from home.
Yeah, and it's interesting in our community, at least. There's a great divide between B2B and B2C businesses. B2B, working from home, you know, it's not the end of the world a lot of times. Right. But I'm in a B2C business, and you know, we need people to be there to sell stuff.
Right.
You know,
right.
So but maybe our leadership team doesn't need to be there. So
right.
that's great. It answers that question. Speaking of telecommuting, give us some. Just go,
Chris.
Oh yeah. Quick clarifying question. Yeah, Scott, go ahead.
So Andrew, entrepreneur, an employee came into his office today. His wife at her company had somebody that tested positive for Corona. So when this guy came in and they found out, they sent him home to work remotely, and he wants to understand what the protocol should be for the rest of his office now, since somebody walked in.
Well, I'll let you speak to the medical advice.
So the current CDC guidelines are we test people if they are having symptoms, if they have a fever or a cough, if they have been to, at the time, high-risk countries, which were Iran, China, and Italy, or they're having symptoms. Monitoring for fevers is very, very important. And there's actually, the CDC has actually said we had been in a containment mode trying to keep sick people away. Now we're in a mitigation role where we're understanding that people that might have had, say, casual contact might still be required to go to work. And that's where it's very, very careful. You have to be careful in monitoring for signs of disease at that point. So.
Yeah, and this touches on so many of the acronyms that you hear in employment law. You know, the ADA, FMLA, HIPAA, all those kind of things. You know, first off, you should be very careful about disclosing employees' medical issues. I think it's fine for the company to say we believe there's been some exposure here. You know, we're going to amp up our cleaning protocols, our hand wiping, everybody pay attention to this, but you don't want to identify the individual who it is. The biggest question that I'm getting asked is, how do you pay people? If we have an hourly employee who comes in and needs that paycheck, but we send her home because she's coughing and sneezing, what do we do? She doesn't have any paid time off. Do you pay that person? From a legal standpoint, non-exempt employees, hourly employees, you don't have to pay them for time that they are not working.
Is that an Ohio thing, or is
that is generally a nationwide thing? And I'll say that caveat with everything that I say. I'm going to talk about the general framework of the law. Particularly when it comes to leave laws and paid leave. There is some differences in states. The region we're in, and I said Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana, Michigan, the law is pretty generic and the same. When you get in the Northeast, like Massachusetts, New York, or on the West Coast, you do have a lot more paid leave provisions that are in play.
So we have a specific question about age.
Sure.
CDC is encouraging people over the age of 60 to stay at home.
Right.
How does that affect comments about age discrimination?
That's a very, very good question. When this virus really first started to hit the news, the advice that employment lawyers were giving was, please don't pick on your Asian employees. Don't, and it happened in our office. We had a Chinese woman. She hadn't traveled to China, but we had elder statesmen at the firm asking if it was okay for her to be in the office. Obviously, with the CDC's recommendation, you have somewhat of a legitimate non-discriminatory reason for saying, hey, look, the CDC has said this is best for you. But yeah, you do want to avoid people in the workplace saying, oh, God, don't let it get Jim because, he's the old timer. That could very easily spiral into a claim of discrimination, even if it's not, if it's made by a coworker who doesn't have any sort of decision-making authority. And that could come up months or years later. So
when you do send Jim home and he's working from home, what's give us your thoughts and kind of best practices around, telecommuting and.
Right. And as you can imagine, this is a super hot topic that we're hearing from a lot of our customers right now around how to deal with this. And so part of it is for people that are sick. Part of it is for people whose children's schools may end up closing, right? And so all of a sudden they're going to have to potentially for the next month or even longer worry about making babysitter arrangements, things like that. They're going to cause them to have you to go through and work from home. And so the questions that we're hearing are around how do we go through and facilitate, people continuing to be productive? How do we collaborate internally and also with our customers? How do we continue to keep business rolling? And how do we do this in a way that ends up not exposing my business to too much risk from an IT security standpoint? And so the good news is that I think we're in a better place as a business community right now than we were a few years ago. The adoption of a lot of cloud technologies have made it easier to go through and connect to these business systems, whether you're in the office or whether you're remote. But the challenge is, how do I secure my data when I do that? So the first thing, looking for meeting technologies, we're all able to go through and collaborate through Zoom today is fantastic. Most organizations have adopted Microsoft Office 365, and a lot of those plans and policies are going to have Teams built into that, which is a collaboration tool that lets you do instant messaging back and forth that has meeting technologies very similar to what we're using today. So it may be something where you haven't adopted that technology, but you have an opportunity now to go through and roll that out. Right? You may want to look at some of the security considerations that go with that. The other challenge is around organizations that are kind of desktops versus laptops. It's one thing if I have people that have a corporate laptop that can take that home, right? Because I know that if they connect to corporate resources, they can generally do that securely. But I may need to go do things like license additional VPNs for people so that they can connect. I may have a license limit, which is perfectly fine for normal operations of my business. But all of a sudden, if 50% or more of my business is working from home on a regular basis, we may need to be able to account for that. So I'd look for things where you're exposed like that.
And you recommend a VPN?
That's one way to go through and do it. But for people that don't have laptops that are connecting, one option is to look at remote desktop. All right, so Microsoft has tools that let you connect to a desktop PC. You may want to publish a gateway that lets you go through and do that securely. Now, there's licensing implications that go with that, or other tools like Go to My PC could be a good short-term option as well. But again, the goal is how do we go through and do this, do it securely. And I'd start to look for those exposures right now, things where you have limitations that maybe wouldn't matter in normal operations, and takes the steps that you can in the short term while building a plan for business continuity over the longer term.
Great. And when things go really bad, we have Allison. We refer to this as the public relations Super Bowl. So
without any trips to Disney.
Right. Yeah. No trips to Disney. So talk to us a little bit about what you're hearing from your clients and, some best practices. For me as a B2C person, I'm in the day spa business, but I'm seeing a lot of people who own gyms, restaurants, and other places where people gather. Is there a way to spin this? What are your thoughts on communicating both internally and externally?
Well, I love that you use the word spin, because I think that the one thing that you don't want to be doing right now is actually spinning anything.
Great. Okay.
So
glad I'm here.
No, but I think this is a really good point, because I think when people think public relations, they think. But in times of crisis, and this is a very unique crisis, because most crises, when you're talking about them, are unique to your organization and, or a specific individual, and you're kind of in this bubble of, you have to deal with it on your own. But this is a crisis that we are all facing, collectively. So there is a little bit of a base level of understanding, like, we're all going through some degree of, fear or complications or something like that. So what we want to do, as communicators on behalf of our clients, and as you want to do as business owners, is to have this level of transparency. Make sure that you are sharing the appropriate and most up-to-date information from the CDC and from WHO, not to speculate, to make sure that your frontline is fully informed of what is going on and what your specific organization is doing to protect your employees. Because if they feel confident, then they will convey that confidence to your clients. Making sure that you have designated spokespeople to the media, who is going to be speaking both internally to your employees and then to your external stakeholders as well. And it's okay not to have all the information. If someone calls you, if someone from the media calls you and they say, hey, what are you doing right now? You can formulate what you want to say and get back to them, of course, within a timely manner.
Yeah.
Again, as long as you have that veil of transparency and, forthrightness with everyone, I think that's paramount. And there are ways to be part of the conversation, but not actually take it away from, the importance of the messages that the local government's trying to get out. One such way is to be a good community steward. So if you want to be involved, I think this was one of the questions that was pre-submitted was, how can you elevate your profile on social media or in the media? How can you help others during this time? And that makes you look good. People will remember how you made them feel, how you helped them during a time of need. And so it boosts your overall brand perception without having to, go out and newsjack, which is typically frowned upon. And that's called, that's essentially taking a news story and using it for your own gain.
Gotcha. Back to Michael, real quickly. Once things settle down, how long do you predict before we'll be back to sort of status quo? Or is this the ripple effect going to last a month, 6 months?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. It's part of the basic human wiring that we all want to know certain type of forecast or predictions. And I got to say that it's very important for us to remember the future is unpredictable. The markets are even more unpredictable. So the only thing that we can go back on is history. And what history tells us is that if we look at previous market declines, they generally speaking, the shortest decline like we're going through today may have taken about 6 months to recover from the point from the low had been put in to the point where it recovers back to the previous high point. More often than not, it takes 18 months to recover. And so, given that, hindsight information, you can essentially work from that. I think that the challenge that most investors have is that they will crack under the pressure of holding on to a strategy that says you're not going to sell into this fear that the markets are going to further plummet. We saw in 2008, 2009, essentially, investors that, after counseling, I mean, this was a 6-month decline. It felt very similar to what we're going through today, but the only investors that were harmed effectively were those that bailed. And so our jobs as financial advisors is to counsel our clients to remain consistent with their investment plan. I'd like to go ahead and talk about some of the things specifically we should be doing today in light of the volatility. Number one, in taxable accounts, there are opportunities to take tax losses and realize those, but not to move and sell out of the market or out of that particular asset class, but to sell that asset and purchase another like-kind asset so that when the market does recover, you're participating in the recovery of the market, but you also have captured a valuable tax loss. So that's tax loss harvesting. The second strategy would be to rebalance. And let's just take a look at a very simple analogy or example. A 50-50 portfolio of stocks and bonds, and I don't think there's too many people with a 50-50 allocation or listening in or in this room, but it's very easy to explain. A 50% position in stocks could decline in value to the point where it is now 40% of your portfolio. The 50% that was in bonds could have appreciated to be as much as 60% of your portfolio. We need to remain consistent with our long-term investment plan, and so we want to trim those bond exposures or profits, sell high, and redeploy those proceeds into stocks when they're low. That is a guaranteed buy low, sell high strategy that works. It is painful, and it's painful to do because you rebalance and you rebalance again at some future date. You continually to rebalance. Those investors that followed that type of discipline in 2008 and 2009 have seen their recovery time getting back to their market value high points much faster than clients that just sat back and did nothing, because a recovery with let's say a 40% portfolio of stocks is going to take longer to recover than a portfolio that had been rebalancing that was at 50% when the market actually takes off again. And it's also important to know that this works in reverse. When the markets were at all-time highs back just months ago, we should have been taking those gains from stocks and not be overexposed to stocks and being at further risk. So that's why I started today's comments by saying it's so important to have a well thought out investment plan, understanding that we all need to be in the market and have a good risk exposure, but we have to understand the exposure is subject to investment periods like we're in today. It's part of the 10% average return that the financial markets have delivered for over 70, 80 years of tracking the public financial markets.
So just again, long-term view, expect this sort of thing to happen.
Absolutely.
And plan ahead by rebalancing.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
Back to you, Martha, for medical. Some are saying that the virus, a lot of the questions we had is, do I already have this? Like, does 50% of the population, does 50% of the population already have this and we just don't know it because of lack of testing? Can you be symptomatic without showing, or can you be infected without showing a lot of symptoms?
And to be quite honest,
Okay.
I think that we have that a lot of what we're looking at is China that's already in recovery is what they're saying. So, the real concern is as people age, and that's where the guidelines come that age 60 is at most risk. This is definitely hitting our older population much harder. And so that's why we're trying to be extra careful with them. There's several nursing facilities in town that are shut down. They're not allowing anybody in or anybody out, which is appropriate with what we're seeing in Seattle. We're not able to test. That is rapidly, next week there should be, in Cincinnati, we should be able to start testing people, again, following the guidelines is who's actually at risk. Not everybody should just be going and getting their test. They're recommending that everybody still get a flu shot. Flu is something that we have a vaccine for, we can prevent. You want to try and prevent as many, control as much as you can control. I think we're probably preaching the same message in different venues, but control as much as you can control. Still getting a flu shot. You don't want to get the flu now in this setting. We don't know if people are, they're saying that the younger people are probably having less severe symptoms. The concern is it looks like about 80% of people do just fine, 20% of people get very sick. And there's a lot of conversation about, I don't know if you saw yesterday, in Germany, they said anticipate 70% of our population will become infected. That's not unique to Germany. I think that that's unique to this virus, and we should anticipate about 70% of Americans will become infected. What the conversation is really about is flattening the curve. Is that if we have everybody get infected all at once and the curve is very, very high, and you take 20% of people in a very short time, our hospitals and our doctors will be overwhelmed. About 20% of people are requiring hospital care, and then some of those people are requiring limited resources such as ventilators and ICU care. We don't have enough ICU beds if it's a very short
compacted,
curve.
right.
So what they're actually asking, what Italy is doing is trying to, what they're calling flatten out the curve. So if you still have 70% of the people getting infected, but it's over a much longer time period, if it's over, people are getting infected over 2 months. Yes, we don't want anybody to get infected. But if we have everybody getting infected over the next 2 or 3 months, it's going to be a much flatter curve, and we're going to be able to take care of people a lot more effectively.
And from a timeline perspective, is that sort of what is that 2 to 3 month time frame? If the curve does flatten, is that sort of what the medical community is expecting? Again, back to fictions. Sorry, we just want to know. Just make something up.
Right.
No, I'm kidding.
We'll have to sleep tonight.
Right, exactly.
I think we do not know. We have no idea. In the state of Ohio, there's 2,000 test kits that are available for the entire state. So we haven't been, it's kind of like we haven't been able to even ask a question to get an answer yet.
Right.
So as testing becomes more available, I think we'll know the prevalence of the disease. What we can do is try and take care of ourselves, take care of each other. Italy has said, we're taking it for all of Europe. We're shutting down. They're trying to stop the spread so that they can flatten out the curve. And so that's the real concern.
Doesn't that also mean just take some of the precautions seriously, some of the self-quarantine, things like that? We hear reports of people that have not paid attention to that and kind of essentially broke the rules and put people at risk as a result.
Correct. And that's the real concern, is that if you have somebody that has very mild symptoms and they're not taking the warning serious, they're not staying home, they're running to Starbucks or running to get something, they're potentially infecting people that then will have serious complications. So yes, we all have to take it quite seriously. There's a lot in place, a lot of conversations, a lot of business planning going on, everybody's going to be impacted. Businesses are going to be changing. Medicine care is going, they're talking about having outside screening so people don't even come into the building, where we can do, drive-through testing if it comes to that, or, so there's, I think, a lot of things in place. It's just, I think, for all of us moving a little less quickly than what we would like. Yeah.
What about supply chain issues? I know from what I've read, a lot of our medicines are manufactured in China, India. Does the medical community expect, or is there anything we can do as not even entrepreneurs, just as humans, to prepare for that, or is that a non-issue?
No, I think it's very much an issue. I think the concern is that the majority of our medicines, or at least the ingredients for our medicines, come from China and from countries that have been seriously impacted. I've heard studies, and again, who knows the accuracy, that about 85% of businesses in China are slowly getting back online, so things should be coming. Any of my patients that are on a medicine that is crucial, that they could not live without, if they can, we're recommending that they get a little extra. As they're able, as their insurance allows them, as they, some people are paying out of pocket to get, and by all means, do not hoard. You don't need a year's supply of toilet paper in your house. You don't need a year's supply of medicines.
That was my next question. Thanks for saying that.
If you need a medicine that we can't substitute, it might make sense for you to pay out of pocket and have an extra 2 weeks supply of that or something. So
excellent. All right. Back to IT. We know about Zoom. Clearly, everyone is watching it. Any specific apps or tools? You mentioned Microsoft Teams. Any quirky stuff that I don't know about that you might recommend, or that might serve us well to manage not only just, communication is one thing, but accountability is another. We're having people working all over the country and the world, maybe even. how do you hold them accountable?
Yeah, and that comes down to, again, having tools that let us go through and kind of effectively collaborate and kind of see when people are online or not. And so things like Zoom or GoToMeeting or WebEx, those are technologies that let us go through and facilitate these types of meetings. And so they're great for being those internal collaboration, for maybe we replace a trip to a customer with a web meeting instead as part of that. But things like Teams, Skype for Business, Slack, those are also instant messaging tools. And so those gives us the ability to kind of have that real-time communication with people on our team, regardless of where they're at. And we can also see their presence associated with that. So I can tell if someone is available sitting at their desk. I can also tell if someone has gotten away and been away from their desk for longer than 5 minutes because their presence changes. And as part of that, as a business owner and worrying about accountability of my employees, I mean, sure, we want to be able to measure productivity, right? But sometimes that's easy, sometimes that's not, depending on the business. So looking at things like log on and log off times so that we have some idea when people are in place and actually at their desks working for the business might be a way to go through and kind of help supplement or do a spot check or review of timesheets, things like that.
Great. And quick shout out to Brad Stevens, who submitted some questions regarding this. He does virtual assistants and things like that, and EO out of Atlanta. But he also messaged me and said he'll be doing a separate webinar at some point on managing virtual staff and how to best use virtual assistants and things like that in a time where sort of everyone, I mean, he's been doing this for years. So certainly he's a great person to turn to as far as an expert on telecommuting and virtual assistants and things like that.
And I think the biggest thing that businesses really need to be planning for right now is just what we can do in the short term. And I mentioned this before, but we've got limited capacity in some of these things. One of the things that I'm concerned about is what are the scalability of services like Teams and WebEx and that kind of thing as all of a sudden people flood onto these tools. So if you don't have licenses for some of these things and you need them for your business, I'd go get it now. I'd worry about bandwidth. Okay, so again, if I'm having people all of a sudden connect back through a VPN to my corporate network, can I go to my telecommunications provider and add bandwidth so I get a better user experience as part of that? I'd want to go have those conversations sooner rather than later because of the lead times that go into getting those new circuits or upgrades deployed. And then again, similar to that, from a telecommunications standpoint, right? How do I answer the phone in some of these scenarios? Do I have the ability to forward things to people that are working at home? Again, I may need to work with my telecommunications provider, or I may need to implement new technologies. So things like Teams, RingCentral, are things that let me do virtual phone systems where people can kind of take those calls remotely. But I definitely get out in front of that stuff because I think we're going to have capacity issues in terms of our ability to get that stuff rolled out on the short term.
Even now, Delta was reporting a 4 to 6 hour wait time to change a flight. Right. So if you're trying to upgrade your bandwidth, you don't want to wait on the phone for 6 hours. It might be a good idea to get ahead of that. Speaking of bandwidth, I'm curious about the unemployment fund. If mass layoffs occur and everyone, decides to do a reduction, I guess, I don't know how unemployment works in other states, but is the fund at risk? I
mean, that's a scenario that's never, ever been discussed up to now.
So I'm the only crazy person
No.
ever thought.
I mean, when you posed the question, it made me do a little research. I mean, I think that what will happen is you'll have a lot of federal funding trickling down to the states to avoid that from happening. Because, look, I mean, this is what unemployment was designed for.
Yep.
So when there are layoffs or even temporary layoffs, people are going to be entitled to their unemployment. It could very well be a big run on the system.
All right. And from a PR perspective, any way to make these employees feel more comfortable about their employer's attitude towards this, or their safety either at work, or what happens if there isn't an unemployment situation?
I think that's a great question. And I think one of the things in general, whether you're speaking internally or externally, the tone really needs to be of reassurance. So reassuring that you are monitoring the situation, that you are proactively taking steps. And that's why you're seeing so many emails from everyone. They all kind of say the same thing, but that's really standard crisis communications protocol is like, we're monitoring the situation. We're actively engaging. This is what we're doing.
We're paying attention.
Yes. And so I think first and foremost, you need to arm your frontline people, especially in retail and consumer-facing businesses with that information of what you're doing, so that they can also articulately convey that to your customers and making them feel comfortable at work. So like, not only what are you doing to adhere to these guidelines, what are you doing above and beyond that? So like, for example, Delta put out this video almost right away. I really have to applaud them. Probably because vessels like planes and boats get all kinds of scary things,
Right.
You know, of them spraying some kind of special spray that disinfects on site. You've seen it, right?
Is it magic spray?
Magic, but they say it kills everything on site, including coronavirus. So, you know, you have that like element of reassurance, right?
Right.
Like, it makes your employees
Dr.
feel
Truth
better.
Is there truth to the magic spray? No, but it's great for PR.
But you know what? It has that brand reassurance.
Yeah.
It reassures your employees. You know, lots of people are adding additional sanitation
Certainly
stations,
not gonna hurt, right?
you know, reinforcing good hygiene, that kind of thing. You know, whatever kind of protocols that you can put in place from an emergency temporary standpoint to help your employees feel better about being there if they have to.
Excellent, thank you. Any questions from the crew?
Yeah, here's a question. How do furloughs work? How far in advance should people be notified? How should it be communicated if it gets to the point of shutting down ops for a brief period?
That's a good question. You know, furloughs, I know one of the questions posed before the panel was furloughs versus layoffs. Furloughs are really planned events, and they can take a number of shapes and forms. Some, if you're in a manufacturing industry, sometimes it's we're just going to close the doors on Friday. You know, and then everybody's going to be off on Friday, and hourly folks won't get paid. If you're doing a wider spread where you're going to be a week or 2 weeks, obviously you should be giving additional notice. There's no hard and fast guidelines. The WARN Act can potentially kick in if you're going to shut down a facility for longer than 30 days. And but the good news there is, again, because this has been declared a pandemic, you have the WARN Act typically requires up to 2 months notice. But there's an exception to that, which is national disasters or unforeseen business circumstances, which certainly this falls into. So I would advise folks, as soon as you reasonably can, give your employees a heads up, be transparent with them about what's going to happen. One thing that I think a lot of employers may be overlooking is if you're going to implement a furlough, if it's going to be company-wide, everybody's got to go home, you need to make sure that your salaried exempt people are not working. Because if someone goes home that week and does an hour's worth of email, they're entitled to their salary for that week. That is the wage and hour law. So if you're going to implement that for cost-cutting purposes, you need to make sure that your staff understands that no work means no work. And if that's
something from an IT standpoint
Right.
that you should have the tools to go through and restrict access, right? So if you're going to go through and furlough people, make sure you're not giving an opportunity to do that, because that puts your business at risk.
Right. And I'll jump off of something that Mike said earlier. I mean, one of the challenges here, I think, is you're gonna have a lot of people that work from home that don't typically work from home. Some of those folks may be hourly. You're gonna need to have policies in place about how they record their time. You know, obviously we'll have software. If you're logging into meetings, we'll be able to see that. But that can be really hard to cobble together to figure out what an employee is owed. So you need to make sure that you're communicating with your employees. They need to record all their time. They're not to be working at times when they're told not to work, so that you have an accurate reflection of, you know, what they should be paid. Because I can tell you the wage and hour laws are very archaic and very unfriendly to employers, even in situations like this.
So Andy, you have people who, like you said, might work from home, working from home, and then you have schools closed. So you have employees that are home with kids, and there's concern around production with your employees, like not performing at 100%.
Right.
Thoughts on that?
And that's a difficult issue for salaried individuals. You know, if you have metrics where you can measure that person's productivity and their productivity is noticeably down, there's nothing wrong with reducing their salary for a limited period of time. You know, and that may be something that companies have to say, look, everybody's going to work from home. We recognize that because we're working from home, we're only 75% effective. You know, into the foreseeable future, we're going to reduce folks' salaries by X amount, you know, with the goal of bringing them back up to what they were before when we can. But there's nothing wrong with reducing salaries on a going forward basis. You just can't reduce them going backwards. So.
Right, and I think this is something where it's just an exercise in risk management for a business kind of all up. Right, when we look at telecommuting policies and maybe we can't go through and put some of those other systems that I talked about in place, and so we're going to let someone connect from a home PC. Right, now normally we don't want to do that. We don't recommend that because that exposes to a security risk. Because whatever tools, investments I've made from an IT to secure my infrastructure aren't in place on that. Right, but I have to balance the risk of IT security or legal risk versus the risk to my business if I don't have operations ongoing. Right. So we may decide, when we look at those trade-offs, that I'm going to accept a little bit of risk. I'm going to accept a little bit less productivity. I'm going to accept some IT security in order to continue to have my ongoing operations.
Hey, Mike, I was going to add today, we just had an all-team meeting, but yesterday we had a management meeting where we decided that we wanted to proactively get in front of this. We have the technology, as we have here at the office. We have many of the components that you have in place, but only a handful of the members of our team have been working remotely, and so to actually test that bandwidth, to test how functional and collaborative we can be. We're going through that process starting tomorrow with our team, and our goal is to identify some of the gaps that we might have, so our IT team can say here's what you need to do to so that we can all be more functional. But I know when I go home and I get on my PC, a lot of people in my office a lot more familiar with that process than I would be.
That's a fantastic point that I appreciate you bringing that up, because I feel like I should have made that point before. But the usability of the tools is important, and the training and adoption that we go through and kind of use with our employees around those is going to be super important to the success of those work from home policies.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of training tools that are on the internet, and so it's something I'd be looking at. Either get a partner or look to your internal IT teams to go through and harness some of those resources. Microsoft technologies are pretty ubiquitous. They've got all kinds of online training available. There are services, there are companies like Brainstorm that have libraries of online training, but it could be something where we supplement some of the rollout of these with technology training programs that are pushed out through learning management systems, where we can say, hey, everybody needs to go through and watch this content, and then you can be accountable for making sure that you've had a chance to see that. And a lot of those systems, if you have those, can also be helpful with things like other company policies around hand washing protocols, other, again, things that might be kind of tangential to the crisis here from an IT standpoint, but still very relevant from a business standpoint.
Yeah, testing it out. Do a dry run in good times and see, identify any gaps in the process. So I think that's great advice. Great. We're coming up on an hour. Are there no more questions? We'll go ahead and I guess wrap it up, unless, does anyone have any final thoughts? No? Great. Well, thank you again to Michael and TruePoint for hosting, and for all of you for taking time out of your day to join us. And thanks again to the Entrepreneur Organization for supporting this event on very, very, very short notice. And thanks to all of you who are watching, and we'll go ahead and record this and post it online as soon as possible.